Hello and welcome to episode 3 of All the Stitches. This is a show about quilting, knitting, needle arts of all kinds, and whatever other crafty thing I've been up to. My name is Colleen, and I'm coming to you from the beautiful Lakes region of New Hampshire in the United States. And I'm sitting in front of this unlit fireplace, and I'm waiting. I'm waiting for sweater weather. I bet you are too. The show today is going to be all about knitting, and I'm calling it my Knit Hit Parade. I wanted to show you the knitting that I've been doing over the last couple of years, my favorites, not all of it. I'm not showing you the real bad ones, I'm just showing you my favorites. What I plan to do today is to tell you a little bit about my knitting history. Now, if you don't want to listen to chatter, that's okay. I'll put a timestamp below and you can fast forward to the knitting if that's what you want to do. I won't test you later. It's okay. But just as a background, I had a dear friend who knit, and her name was Barbara. And Barbara was a fabulous knitter. She still is a fabulous knitter, doing a lot of detailed lace work and textures, and her color sense was just extraordinary. And Barbara and I took a lot of trips together and spent a lot of time together. And all the time she'd be knitting and knitting. And I'd sit and I'd listen to this very relaxing, clicking of needles and watch this gorgeous fabric flow from her needles. And I said, and I was she was a quilter too, but I was strictly a quilter at that point. But I always thought, I'd really like to learn to knit, but it would be another thing. It would be more yarn, supplies, you name it. But I was really drawn to it because of watching Barbara. So at one point I saw a class in a local shop, and they had a beginning knitting class. Perfect. I signed up. It was multi-week, 6-week or 8-week. And I signed up and I was so excited. And in my first class, I sat down and realized that everyone in that class knew how to knit except me. Well, okay, I could get over that. But because there was so much experience in the class already, the instructor on the first night taught how to cast on, how to knit, and how to purl the first night. That was not happening for me. I struggled so badly. I felt so dumb. Ladies and gentlemen, I wore the dunce cap. I did. It was bad. I didn't make a scene. I don't tend to do that. I just struggled. And, I would just get the cast on and then we'd be off to knit. And then I would lose the yarn off the needles. And, and purl, forget that. I'm not sure. I may have taken a stitch or two. But honestly, I was lost. And the poor instructor, she did what she could, I guess. So, it was a good-sized class, and I was lagging behind. But at one point, I, lost the stitches again off the needle. I struggled again because by that time we'd learned a little knitting and a little purling. So, I had to try to figure out again how to cast on. It was just too fast. For me, anyway, it was too fast. So at one point, the poor beleaguered teacher grabbed the needles out of my hand, cast on a few stitches, and threw it back to me. And you know what? It was enough to just really discourage me. And I walked out of that class, and even though there were several more classes coming, I never went back. I felt embarrassed. I felt stupid. And I was very disappointed. Lucky for me, I had my friend Barbara. And Barbara encouraged me to keep trying in her sort of laid-back way. She was just always there with her knitting. You might be saying, why didn't Barbara teach you? Well, Barbara knits a different way. I learned as a thrower, and I still do. Barbara does not knit continental, but it's some sort of continental, but it's, I think, some other kind of European type knitting. And it's hard for her to transfer that to the way I knit. So Barbara helped me a lot when I got caught up with things, and she certainly encouraged me, but she was never able to really teach me the stitches. So that was fine. So, and I kind of lost interest in a way. I always wanted to, but I felt like it wasn't for me. I need to just quilt because that's what I do best. I'm easily discouraged. What can I say? So, at some point later, I was working in downtown Boston, and I noticed that Windsor Button, which was a wonderful old store, it had to be well over 100 years old, and the creaky floorboards and all that, they sold walls and walls of buttons. And they also sold sewing supplies and notions. They later on came in with yarn. And as the knitting craze picked up and started to grow with younger people, they really started stocking the store with yarn. And it was a great place. Unfortunately, they closed quite a while ago. Windsor Button started to run lunch hour knitting classes. Learn to knit on your lunch hour. So I got up the courage and I signed up, and there were only 4-week classes. And as I remember, it was twice a week. So I would leave work, I would eat my lunch at my desk, I would run down there and take a class for an hour and then run back to work. And the instructor, her name was Agnes, and I will never forget her as long as I live. Because I came in and I said to her, I may not be able to learn. Can you imagine? I said, I might not be able to learn. I really struggle with this and I'm not sure I can do it. And she said, nonsense. Sit down. We'll knit. Well, she was so patient and kind and encouraging, and she just stuck with me. We started very simple. Just learn to knit. And next thing you know, I was knitting a scarf with stockinette stitch. And yes, it went like this and like that and like that and like this. But you know what? I love that scarf and I love the process. And I went home and I just practiced and practiced. And in fact, even before that class, Barbara showed me how to cast on, do a long tail cast on. And I spent night after night, casting on, and then taking it off. And then, so, some people like me need the repetition, right? You need to be able to repeat something and just, in order to get it in your head, your thick head. So, anyway, these classes with Agnes were wonderful. And there were only a couple of other women in the classes, and everybody was so supportive. Well, I didn't just take one set of classes. I took it 4 times. And because I wanted to learn more. And I wanted to learn beyond scarves. So she taught me how to make a hat. She taught me how to make a vest. I made a vest. I made a simple vest. And when I think of it, that yarn was so ugly, but but I loved it. But I continued after that. And I'm sure Barbara was delighted to have her quilting friend also be a knitting friend. And we went on and visited knitting shops, and we went to Stitches East a few times, and we went to Rhinebeck a couple times. And she really introduced me to this whole world of knitting. And this cult, shall I say, of knitting. And it was just great. But you know what happened? I think I bit off more than I could chew because I was a really inexperienced knitter. And though I was getting so much encouragement, you can do that. Yes, you can do that, and I can help you with that. And that was great. But I took on too much. So I had too many failures up front. I made a couple of sweaters that were they were not good. They were not good. But I eventually grew kind of overwhelmed with it because I was a slow knitter and a beginning knitter. So when I was finished with something, it was, it didn't fit or it didn't look right. And that was discouraging. I ended up sort of putting it away. And despite the fact that I had It's quite a stash at that point, but it was a stash that was over my head. But I started to pay more attention to my quilting and leave the knitting behind a little bit. But it was always there, and I pecked away at it here and there. But then I discovered Ravelry, and I discovered all these YouTube videos, and I thought, wow, this is something that I really need to pursue. Plus, I have all the yarn, you know. So as I got into it, and I really think that a lot of the YouTube videos are what really encouraged me at this point. I made some friends who also knit and were doing some really beautiful things. So I found myself surrounded by it all, and then you know what? It was time to get back. And once I did, I was hard to stop. and then I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to have taken an early retirement. And that's when I came into my own with knitting, I think. And though, believe me, I have so much more to learn, but now I'm up for it. And now I have the mind space for it. And I just love it. So here we go. I'm about to start my knit hit parade of my favorite knits over the last couple of years. Here it is. This was eventful. This was my first colorwork project. It's the Alpaca Cowl by Deb Giaculo, and the yarn is Valley Yarns Wachusett. And because I was encouraged by that, I saw this pattern. And I had to have it. I had to make it. It has a crazy pom-pom because I didn't know. Here's something else I learned. Don't make your pom-poms so heavy because they won't stand up. But that's not the only problem with this. This is the Bobble Hat by Donna Smith. And the yarn is a Cascade 220 Superwash Aran. You might be saying, that looks a little big. Oh, it's big. I won't try it on because it's hot today and I'll just be a puddle. I love the pattern, but the hat is so big. What I discovered is this Donna Smith pattern is a British pattern. And as I understand it, it calls for Aran weight yarn. Aran weight yarn in the UK is actually worsted weight yarn here in the US. But I bought Aran weight yarn for this. So I have a big, big, heavy hat. Now, all I need, really, is to find Sasquatch and give him a winter hat. I'm holding on to it just in case that happens. But in the meantime, I'm keeping it because I just love the look of it. I do plan to make it with a worsted weight yarn because I love this hat. I'd love to redo it. My first lace work. It's the Miski Cowl by Jane Ellison. The yarn is Marisol yarn by Miski, and the color is winter white. I'll hold it close. My next knit is the Three Pines Cowl by Bryn Reardon. You see the three little trees? If any of you are familiar with the books by Louise Penny, she writes mystery novels, and I think she probably has 12, 13, or 14 of them out in the series now, but they take place in this fictional town called Three Pines. And they're just wonderful. It's a town you'd love to go and live in and meet all these people that don't really exist. But the only problem is there's an awful lot of murders there for this small town. But but when I saw this pattern for Three Pines Cowl, I thought you'll have to make that. And the yarn is Malabrigo Rios, and the color is number 128, Fresco e Secco. I'll put the title down below because I completely butchered that, and my Italian relatives are probably really disappointed right now. Followed up by the Three Pines hat. A little harder to see. Gosh, this Rios is beautiful yarn. The pom-pom, still a little big. Still working on the pom-pom issue. But there's the Three Pines in the front. I went back to some color work. And I knit the Mountain Mist hat by Tin Can Knits. The yarn is a Cascade 220 superwash. I think you can see the colors pretty clear. And I added a purchased pom-pom that I just love. That was, talk about easy and fun, very quick, and a great little hat. I went hat crazy last winter. I kept looking at this pattern, and boy, I love it. It's the Alaska hat by Camille Descoteaux. I'm sorry for all the butchering I'm doing of names. But I can't pronounce your name, but I love your pattern. The Alaska hat. The yarn is from Knit Circus, Greatest of Ease, and it came as a little kit. You know, the two yarns came as a kit. I love that. I'd been to Alaska 10 years ago this summer, and when I saw that, I said, wow, I mean, that looked like Alaska. I saw this from trains as we passed through. It's just gorgeous. I love this pattern. These are Shetland Fingering Weight Mitts by Marcy Richardson of the Elegant U, a shop in Concord, New Hampshire. Hello. The yarn is Murray Wallen's British Breeds. And it's the first time I've really used multiple colors for such fine color work. I started these over a year ago, and I made one, and I found it a little difficult because it was the first time I had these multiple, you know, each row is multiple colors. And I found it a little tough. So, but I got through one. That was great. I loved it, and I wanted to make the other one, but I wanted to move on too. So I put it aside, and next thing you know, a year goes by. And I said, I want those for this fall. So I knit the other one. And you know, in that year's time, with the experience that I had with other projects, I just blew through them. It was a couple of evenings I finished them. But the funny thing I noticed is my tension was so different from a year ago. Last year, I think I was, you know, nervous and probably pulling the yarn too tight on the floats. And so this is, it, you know, it fits, but it's a little snug. But my newest one is much bigger. And in fact, when you put them together, when you hold them together side by side, it is much bigger. But I don't think you can tell when they're on. And if you can, who cares? I love them. It's kind of a memory because I went to the Elegant U with some friends, and we had a nice day together shopping there and having lunch, and it was so great to see them. I hadn't seen them in a while. And we all bought this yarn and the pattern. And so sometimes it doesn't have to be perfect. Now I'm moving on to socks. And I've knit a lot of socks, but these are just my most recent socks. This is Heel Toe Do-Si-Do by Kay Litton, otherwise known as the Crazy Sock Lady. I do have two. I didn't stop with one. She's a great sock designer. And you can see It's just striped yarn. The yarn is West Yorkshire Spinners Signature 4-ply. The stripe color is robin, and the red is cayenne pepper. And the pattern is fantastic for striped yarn because you can see she has some detail. You do some pattern stitches on the front, and it allows for those wavy lines, while the back you can see the stripe. Just thought it was so effective. And this was my Christmas Eve cast on from 2019. Here's another pair of socks. This yarn is from the Cozy Knitter, and it's called Kissed a Girl. It's a self-striping. Their yarns are beautiful. So many beautiful colors, and I just love the feel and the texture and the weight of their yarn. So they're just little plain vanilla socks. I've started to use Kay Litton's instructions for making toes and heels, and I really like them. I like them a lot, and I like their fit. I made these a little longer because I love the yarn so much that I just kept knitting and knitting and knitting. So they're kind of an odd size, but they're a nice warm sock. So now I'm moving on to shawls. I never thought I'd be able to make a shawl, but I did, because I found Helen Stewart's pattern, the Spindrift shawl. The yarn is Dreamin' Color Smooshy. It's a sock yarn. I'll put this on for a minute. And it's pink, but it has a little tiny blue in it, which just goes so well with anything from jeans to whatever. I love this shawl, and I was so pleased with myself. Helen Stewart as you know, I'm sure, her patterns are so easy because her instructions are line by line. So with each line, I just put my little Post-it note on and I follow along. And for someone like me who kind of struggles with the concentration of it, sometimes it's so helpful. But just, simple yarn overs in the bottom with that picot edging. And what a fun project. And I felt so accomplished. I was so accomplished after this. Next shawl, I've only made 2, is the Right Around the Corner shawl. This is from Lisa Haynes. And how do you not love tassels? I mean, really, anything with tassels is good. I'll try to put this on too. This is a little... I really don't wear it as a mask. It's probably not good for you. But here's an idea. I could need to futz with it a little bit, but here's the idea. Oh, I'm so delighted with this, using the 2 colors and picking up the edges and doing the one side and then the other. It's all garter stitch. It was fun, it was easy, and I'm dreaming about making another one. And I think I'm going to do that. The yarn I used was Malabrigo Makita, and the colors are Pearl, and that's the gray, and Azul, how do you pronounce that? Azul, A-Z-U-L, that's the navy blue. Also a really nice soft yarn. I loved it. It's got beautiful drape. So as I mentioned, I started to watch a lot of YouTube videos, and one of my absolute favorites are the Grocery Girls. Tracy and Jody are funny, they're creative and talented, and they're sometimes moving. I've been moved to tears before watching them because they're so genuine and just so lovely. But I found myself kind of following along behind them because at least a couple of sweaters they made, I decided I had to make them. They just talked them up so much that I thought, well, I think I can do that because Tracy and Jody say they could do it. So the first one I copied from them is the Mountain Mist sweater. This is the sweater by Tin Can Knits. I deviated from the pattern in that I split the hem and I made the back, I think, an inch or two longer than the front. But that was something that the Grocery Girls had suggested, and I thought that was a great idea, and it worked out for me. It just made for a nice fitting sweater. And I just used a Cascade 220, a simple yarn that wasn't very expensive, because I thought, gee, I don't know, can I do this? Will I be able to do this, and will it fit? But this sweater fits perfectly. And it's so warm, and I'm so pleased with it. And I think of the Grocery Girls when I wear it. And that hat that I showed you earlier, yes, it's the same pattern, Mountain Mist. After I finished the sweater, I just had so much yarn left, and I said, well, I'll just make the hat too. So then I really got into color work, and I saw all these Soldotna crops everywhere on Instagram and Ravelry, whatever. And I knew I don't have a crop body, so I knew the crop wasn't going to be for me. But I really just wanted to make this pattern. So I did. And this is the Soldotna not cropped because I bought an extra skein of the gray yarn, and I just kept knitting until I was comfortable with the length. I think if I were to do it again, and I probably will because I really loved knitting this, I think I would make the sleeves a little longer, like I would drop them down a little bit because they're a little bit too under the arm. But you know what? I wear a turtleneck or a long sleeve jersey under it. The Soldotna crop is by Caitlin Hunter, and the yarn is from Magpie Fibers, and it's Swanky DK. Oh, you know what? I've decided that Magpie Fibers Swanky DK is my absolute favorite yarn. You may notice, if you're familiar with the Soldotna, the bottom row of color I did in the sort of a goldy green color. It should be, if you look at the pattern, it should be the black. It should be this trim. But I was running so short of the black at that point, and I knew I still had to do the hem. So I said, well, I don't know. So it doesn't do quite what the design should have done, but it's okay. I don't mind it. It's a little bit different, but I've made it my own. Well, I continued to watch the Grocery Girls, and Tracy got me in trouble because she was making a beautiful sweater called the Calyx sweater by Elizabeth Doherty. And her calyx and the pattern called for holding two yarns together. And one was a linen, so it had this lovely drape to it. But, I didn't want to buy more yarn, and I didn't want to hold two yarns together because I thought it might be kind of a nuisance for me. I had a DK yarn that I just purchased from Yarn Cafe Creations. It's Americana DK, and the color is maple. And this is the Calyx sweater. I'm sorry, I should have steamed it out. It's a little wrinkled. And it's kind of hard to see. But it has that lovely pattern on the front and down the sleeves. If you can see that. That lacy pattern runs down the sleeve. Well, this was an experience. The yarn's lovely, but I think it's the first large garment that I knit that is a hand dye. And I learned about pooling. I learned about color changes. So I have things like, one sleeve is darker than the rest. You can see across this middle here where the yarn changed. But, I had other problems with this knit. I just misread the instructions. So I kept knitting and knitting and knitting. And eventually I tried it on and realized it's a tunic. It's not a sweater, it's a tunic. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just wear it as a tunic. Who knows? But I had worked so much on it, so many hours, because it's an interesting pattern. It's a perfectly written pattern. And if you just follow it, you're fine. But if you get off track like I did, it becomes interesting. But I ended up with this huge long sweater. And then because it was a bottom-up sweater, I said, oh boy, what am I going to do? I just didn't think it was wearable after all that time. So I ended up doing the scary thing. And that is, I cut it. I put a lifeline in and I cut my knitting. And it was okay. I looked a lot online how to do this. I looked and looked and looked, and I watched 100 times, and then finally took the scissors to it. And it was okay. I ended up, the front where the laces, that was a little rough. I ended up with some loose yarns here and there, and I really just caught them and was able to weave them in. But you know what? It fits. It's wearable. And now I'm really pleased with it. And would I do it again? No. But I would recommend the pattern for I would say, an intermediate knitter. For me, I was trying to just get it done and move on. And I swear, every time I thought, oh, good, that section's done, I would turn the page and there would be something new to learn again. I learned so many new methods. And when I look back, it was a wonderful pattern to knit for me. I learned so much from it. But at the time, I was pretty overwhelmed. And even the simple thing, like this little, I don't know if you can see this braid that's under the collar. There's this little braid that you stitch in. And it was so pretty. And it's something I said, I'll take note of that. And I'll use that on another sweater sometime, even if it doesn't call for it. So it's all worth it, right? If you can learn something, it's all worth it, even if you're impatient with yourself. The reason I wanted to get through that calyx sweater so badly is that I had another pattern in mind that I wanted to knit, and that was the Alaska sweater by Camille Descotteau. Camille Descotteau. And yes, it is the same designer as the Alaska hat. The yarn is Knit Circus yarn, Divine Decay. The color, the gradient at the top is the Rise and Shine gradient in Daybreak, and the yellow is Cornflower. The blue, I'm not sure what the blue is. But again, it was a kit from Knit Circus yarn. Even has the little trees on the cuffs, which I just love. And when I bought this group of yarn for this sweater, I saw the picture, and the picture was a gray where the yellow is, and more of I wasn't sure if it was a navy or a black or a dark gray for the trees. And I love that. Again, that was just so Alaska to me. And so when I got the package, I opened it up and I saw all this yellow yarn. And I'm like, what? What is this? I looked back at my order and I had ordered the wrong thing. I just, selected the wrong kit. But I kept looking at it and I said, I don't really wear yellow and, But the more I looked at it, I said, what a great sweater to wear with a pair of jeans, just more of a, early spring sweater than another dark, gray or dark sweater. The only thing I don't like about it is when you carry the yarn across the trees, you can see it because the yellow is so pale. You can see the dark yarn behind it from the trees. But then other times I look at it and I say, well, isn't that kind of how, the sky sort of changes colors behind the tree, between the trees in a forest. Well, that's what I'll say. And I am happy with it. Again, it's a sweater that fits. It was nice, beautiful raglan shaping along the top. First time I'd done that. So another learning experience and another wonderful sweater to wear. My last one, well, I got pretty brave with this one, I think. This is the Birkin sweater by Caitlin Hunter. The yarn is from Brooklyn Tweed, and it's their Loft yarn. I don't have all the colors, but this is the natural color. The colors are gorgeous, and their yarns are truly so rich in the colors and beautiful. But there's always a story, at least for me, when it comes to knitting. And this was a lot for me to take on, though I've done color work, because there was a lot of different colors. And some of the rows were 3 colors, some 4. So that was new. Boy, I got all tangled up with that. But another great learning experience. Love the results. Now, one issue I have, and I know a lot of people wouldn't agree with me at all on this, but the Brooklyn Tweed Loft, beautiful colors in their yarn, but it is a very sheepy yarn. It's I literally was picking hay out of it. And that was my first experience with such sheepy yarn. And it has kind of a bite to it, so that when you're working on it, it gets caught up on itself. Because I'm a thrower and I don't carry the yarn with 2 hands and all that, it was kind of a nuisance because I felt like I was constantly digging around trying to find that other strand of yarn and having to pull it over. But, look at the result. And so it's great yarn for color work. Oh, my other experience with this was this. I got about 3/4 of the way through with the color work. It's a top-down sweater. So I got about, I don't know, up to here. And then I realized that I had an extra yarn. I had a yellow yarn. And I thought, wonder where that goes. Why haven't I used that yet? So I looked at the color picture. I had been working off a pattern that I had printed off on my printer. And I looked at the color photo online and I said, where is that yellow? Why don't I have that yellow in my sweater? And sure enough, when I looked at my pattern, I realized that when I had gone to print my pattern, my printer was out of yellow ink. So it didn't print the yellow at all. It just appeared to be white like the background. So I had to take it all back. I had to take it all back up to the green on the top. That was pretty discouraging, as it is on both sides. But I lived through it. I like this pattern. You sort of make an A-line shape by just changing the needles. There's not a lot of increases or anything. It's just this shaping because of the size of the needles. And I think that's a fabulous idea. I did the same thing here where I did the split hem. Really like that style. It turned out that once I washed this sweater it softened up a little, thank goodness, but it also stretched. And I was a little surprised. I know that that's an issue with superwash wool, but I was a little surprised that it happened with such a woolly sweater. I probably handled it too much and let it stretch out too much. But you know what? It's an oversized sweater, but I still think I'd always have to wear a turtleneck under this. So I think it's still a nice, easy, casual sweater to wear. So now you're all caught up on my knitting, my knit hit parade. These are my favorites and some of my hits and misses, really, that I've talked about today. But overall, I just have found this passion for knitting. And I'm so grateful for having met Agnes, the teacher at Windsor Button, and certainly my friend Barbara, as well as other knitting friends along the way who've been so encouraging. Especially now, in these days, I really appreciate having that love of knitting and quilting and whatever else, because I am just never bored, and I don't just do it not to be bored. I do it because I love it and I really can't stop. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe so you won't miss a future episode. And please feel free to leave any comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope all of your stitches bring joy.